So there is an obscure franchise owner that franchises lawn businesses. He's from Australia. He's kind of obscure, but he wrote this book called Biohistory: Decline and Fall of the West. And I've probably read this book about 4 times. Um, he's the kind of guy I would really like to pick his brain because he's a pretty smart dude, but he's a self-made millionaire, and he funds his own research. And what he does is he tests, you know, rats and under certain conditions. And what he does is he correlates that with historical cycles. For example, in a period of food shortage, the mice or the rats are more attentive to their young, and he associates this with more civilized behavior, someone who can tolerate more frustration, someone who's more willing to have kids. And then, you go back in history, civilization kind of has this cycle where, as it's coming up, as civilization is growing, people are coming out of hard times. And usually out of that, you get a more stringent religion, people that adhere to religion more under these circumstances. And of course, also he talks about religion. He says that, it's common religious practice where people do fasting, where they abstain from eating for a period of time. And there's a lot of research that's done on what that does to the body, what it does to behavior. But what he says is that, religious practices or environmental conditions, this has an effect on society, and it has an effect, obviously on the culture, in the civilization cycle, where the civilization is coming up and then as it comes down. When a civilization has too much, or when life just gets a little too easy, people get softer. And I mean, you can see this with a lot of different civilizations. You saw this in Rome during several time periods, but you saw it in Italy right about the time of Julius Caesar, when the culture, was such in a way people became less civilized, people's loyalties became more personal, and, the Roman Republic eventually became the Roman Empire under Octavian. Same thing happens with other cultures. It happens in China several times over, actually. It happened in Japan once, I think during the medieval period. It kind of, went through that little bit of a cycle. Persia, obviously, many times. The Middle East, it has gone through that in a very pronounced way during the Bronze Age, and then after that, it kind of became dominated by other powers since. And of course, in the West is actually a derivative of the Germanic civilization. In other words, like the people of German blood. So like Northern Europe, the United States, like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, they're actually extensions of Great Britain or the British Empire. And essentially, English people are basically German. So that right now is in a process of decline. And it's in decline because, as you know, we have too much and people's characters are getting soft. Now, I had a discussion, or I do have a discussion with somebody, and on this channel I talk about social engineering. And he says that, this Jim Penman guy, he's not telling the full story, or, it's sort of a cop-out where, what he thinks is that, it's the problems that we have today has a lot to do with social engineering. And he's definitely partly correct. whether through legislation or through corporate, manipulation of the media and entertainment industry, etc. There's an agenda that's being pushed on us to dumb us down. At the same time, like I said, like Jim Penman would say, that we do have too much. So the decline of our civilization is actually twofold. It's actually, in part, being done on purpose, but also in part because we are the great-grandchildren of spoiled, rotten brats. Our characters has been made soft because of the technology, but it's also has become polluted by the social engineering. And when I say social engineering, it's not just psychological, it's also chemical. And our food, our water, all that's been spiked by, for example, endocrine disruptors like sunscreen, for example, or scented candles. They have compounds that actually lower your testosterone level. But so anyway, that's my take on it. Our decline of our civilization is a combination of what this guy talks about, which is very interesting. I very much recommend reading it, but also in part because of the social engineering. So that's my thoughts on that. One more thing, I want to mention this concept because I was going to do it and I forgot to talk about it. But anyway, with the people and the government, the system of government that we have in the people, it's a feedback loop. So, a lot of times people say that the government that we have is what we deserve. And I think that's a true statement. But at the same time, we have a system where consent is being manufactured through psychological warfare. Case in point, a lot of people, are supporting the Ukraine side of this Ukraine-Russia war. And I mean, anybody who's paying attention isn't going to support Ukraine. But anyway, that's just one example. So, our government is what it is in a large part because we're soft. We've allowed it to be this way. And we're so cynical that we don't get involved in government. I very strongly believe that that people like me and people like, who are watching this, I really believe that you can do something about this. Like, I really believe that, the system, especially on the local level, can only get away with so much. And the federal level, that's a bit different because the federal level, you got special interests, and our politicians represent a special interest by and large. But anyway, so yeah, it's a feedback loop. So we get the government we deserve, but the government, through legislation, has created a situation where we're being suppressed. So, for example, our tax system. The income tax is not used to fund roads and schools. It's actually to pay the interest on the debt, and actually the real purpose is to control people financially. Everything that we think that we're getting from government that are so-called public goods is actually from the central bank. It's actually borrowed from the central bank. But anyway, the government is what we get, but our government is also engineering us to be slaves. So it's a feedback loop. But the exogenous factors is you got the special interests, you got the quote-unquote system, whether you call it the neo-Marxist agenda or whatever. And then you got the people. You got people like myself and the people that are watching this that are also a factor. We can set examples on the grassroots level to say, hey, look at how I live. You're living in the matrix, and and can actually change the system. So anyway, that's the last little concept. It's a bit of a rant, but I just wanted to tie that in with the other part of the video.